Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Daily Audio Stash is where responsible marijuana smokers listen in on the latest news about cannabis, hear the voices of the marijuana law reform movement in special segments and interviews, and kick back with comedy and music no other podcast can offer. It's NORML's Daily Audio Stash. More information at normalaudiostash.com. First up today, it's news from NORML. Our news today. NORML lawyers in court today for San Diego medical marijuana lawsuit. Attorneys for San Diego NORML will be appearing in San Diego Superior Court today, alongside the State Attorney General's office and other medical marijuana advocates in opposition to San Diego County's lawsuit against California's medical marijuana law, Proposition 215. San Diego is seeking to overturn a state law requiring it to issue identification cards to legal medical marijuana patients. The county contends that it cannot be forced to do so because Prop 215 violates federal law. San Diego has been joined in the lawsuit by San Bernardino and Merced counties. San Diego NORML was named in the lawsuit because it threatened to sue the county for failing to implement state law. Quote, San Diego's complaint should be with the voters and the legislature of the state of California, not with a small nonprofit organization seeking to ensure its compliance with state law, close quote, says San Diego NORML's attorney Jeremy Blank. He continued, quote, this is an action by 3 rogue counties out of 58 in the state. Prop 215 has been working in California for 10 years to provide medical relief to thousands of sick Californians, close quote. Attorneys for the ACLU, Americans for Safe Access, and the Drug Policy Alliance will also be opposing the San Diego lawsuit. In a preliminary hearing, Judge Nevitt summarized the 3 main issues to be decided. 1. Does the county have standing? 2. Does federal law preempt Proposition 215? And 3. In regards to Prop 215, does State Bill 420 contradict the California Constitution? California NORML Coordinator Dale Garinger accused the county of wasting the taxpayers' money on an ill-advised lawsuit against patients' rights to use medical marijuana. Quote, the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that states are not compelled to enforce federal law, close quote, says Garinger. He continued, quote, the state ID card system is designed to save the state money by averting needless arrests and prosecution of valid patients. Oregon's card system made a profit of $1.1 million. San Diego would do better to legally license medical cannabis like other cities and counties, rather than waste taxpayers' money trying to suppress it, close quote. More information can be found on California NORML's website. That's CANORML.org. Welcome back to the Audio Stash. Today, I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. Just visit NORML.org. Today on the Audio Stash, we'll hear from NORML's Executive Director, Alan St. Pierre, about the goings-on in Washington, D.C., and the Director of Michigan NORML, Tim Beck, about medical marijuana in the Midwest. But first today, we have an official winner in last week's free stuff giveaway. Thanks for the over 100 entries to our contest. Our randomly drawn winner will receive a stash of swag from us here at NORML, including buttons, a gold marijuana leaf lapel pin, freedom cards, and some 100% pure and natural hemp. We'll have another free stuff giveaway on Friday, so make sure to keep your computer, cell phone, or iPod locked in here to the Audio Stash. Now it's time to check in with NORML's Executive Director, Alan St. Pierre, with this important information about the change in leadership happening in Congress and what it means for marijuana reform.
many political pundits are still picking through the rubble of last week's elections. One major change brought about by the election tumult is the elevation of Nancy Pelosi to become the Congress's first female Speaker of the House. Why is this important to cannabis law reformers? It's important because for the first time ever, the major congressional player is a longtime supporter of sane and rational alternatives to just say no and prohibition-oriented policies regarding cannabis. Mrs. Pelosi's ascendancy to House Speaker presents cannabis law reformers the best chance in a generation to pass progressive federal legislation that dials back the nearly 7-decade-old government war on the cannabis plant and its consumers. Mrs. Pelosi is a longtime supporter and recipient of NORML PAC and California NORML donations. She's a former co-sponsor and supporter of the States' Rights to Medical Marijuana Act, and she has voted repeatedly in favor of the House Appropriations Hinchey-Rohrabacher Amendment to bar the United States Department of Justice from spending federal tax dollars to interfere with the statewide medical marijuana laws. Pelosi has also opposed the passage of the Barr Amendment, preventing Washington, D.C. from implementing its 1999 medical marijuana law. She's also argued for reduced funding for Planned Colombia and has been a leading critic of tactics used by the ONDCP's anti-drug youth media campaign. She's also on record in favor of needle exchange and opposing random drug testing for federal workers. Mrs. Pelosi recently received a 100% approval rating in the Drug Policy Alliance's Congressional Voting Guide. Certainly, her elevation to Speaker, as well as the elevation of Michigan Democrat John Conyers to Judiciary Committee Chairman. Conyers is a longtime co-sponsor of the state's Rights to Medical Marijuana Act and also co-sponsor of H.R. 4272, the Steve McWilliams Truth in Trials Act. This bodes well for drug policy reforms such as Hinchey-Rohrabacher, reducing the ONDCP ad budget, and perhaps lifting the Barr Amendment in Washington, D.C., as well as perhaps other broader reforms regarding medical marijuana legalization and/or decriminalization. In sum, approximately 38 drug warrior types were defeated or retired because of scandal in this election, and they were replaced by 20 or more likely supporters for cannabis law reforms, especially medical marijuana law reforms. While the past 30 years of drug warring provides no viable excuse for concerned citizens and stakeholders in cannabis law reform to have sat idly by on the political sidelines, now is the time to demonstrate to this new Congress that America is more than ready and able to end cannabis prohibition with policies that favor depenalization and legalization. Stay tuned daily to NORML's audio stash for breaking news from the nation's capital regarding pot and politics from this new and possibly cannabis-friendly Congress. You can also stay up to date on state and federal issues regarding cannabis legislation via NORML's webpage at NORML, NORML.org. Click on the Contact Officials link where you can read about pending pro or anti-cannabis legislation, as well as contact your state and federal policymakers directly to tell them the kind of cannabis policy you support. This is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C.
Alan and the NORML staff love to hear from you, our listeners. Send them email. We have links at normalaudiostash.com. Next up today, we'll hear about the changes happening for medical marijuana in Michigan. Medical marijuana initiatives and legislative proposals are going before a number of states this year. Voters in Michigan have a strong record of support for medical marijuana, with the cities of Detroit, Ferndale, Ann Arbor, and others passing local ballot initiatives protecting medical marijuana patients from arrest. Next week, the Michigan House Committee on Government Operations will hear testimony on a new medical marijuana bill, HB 5470. Joining us today from Detroit is the Director of Michigan NORML, Tim Beck. Tim, welcome back to the Audio Stash today.
Glad to be back, Chris. Always a pleasure.
Always great to speak with you, Tim. First, tell us about the bill, HB 5470.
Well, what the bill will do, it's a fairly conservative bill, and it would bring, relief to individuals that are seriously ill and need to use medical marijuana. Again, it would allow, people to grow their own. It would allow a limited kind of distribution system. It's not, we'd like to have something in California and Oregon, but this is a little bit more conservative. And the reality is that, it's not likely that this bill is going to pass. What really is going on here, we're setting the stage to do a statewide ballot initiative in 2008. That's the real master plan. And we're getting this evidence of the scientific value of medical marijuana into the public record. There's going to be a lot of media there. We're very excited. Irv Rosenfeld is coming up from Florida with his government-issued, medical marijuana, and he's very, very effective person. And then Don Murphy, State Senator Don Murphy, from Maryland, State Representative Penny Bianchi from Connecticut is coming up. And plus we have a couple persons that have, some very, very serious health problems that are members of Michigan NORML, and they will be testifying. But the main purpose is to, no pun intended, but to kind of put on a dog and pony show for the media and, and to get the testimony into the record, period. And this way they can't come back and say, wait a minute, you didn't consult with us, you didn't try, and now you're running this marijuana, this ballot initiative and all that. So we're pulling the rug out, from our opposition from day one as a strategic move. Now, we do have some friendly legislators. The bill itself was co-sponsored by both Republicans and Democrats. There were maybe a dozen of them, but overall the legislature is hostile. We look at them as practically a hopeless case, unfortunately, and so we're going to have to go the ballot initiative route, and this is part of that the opening salvos, you might say, in the long-term struggle.
Jim, this is going before the House Committee on Government Operations. How did the testimony end up there?
Well, here's what the deal, and this is one, what is that cliche, about making laws and sausage? It can be pretty nauseating the way some of these things work out. And what happened, it was originally in the Public Health Committee, but the chairman of that committee, the House is both, and Senate are both controlled by Republicans at the moment, but this legislator, chairman of Public Health, felt that medical marijuana was a little too hot to handle, because in addition he wanted to have a hearing on stem cell research, which is anathema to a lot of the far right, Republicans, and this guy's a moderate Republican, so he is empathetic to medical marijuana, but he felt it was too risky to do stem cell as well as medical marijuana. So what he did, he worked out a deal with the chairman of the Government Operations Committee to kick it over to Government Operations. That way his rear end is covered for the election. He's not going to get too much heat from his Republican colleagues, and somebody else can handle it. So that's the logic.
Do you think it's better in a way to have medical marijuana on the ballot with less other candidates and initiatives to get it more focused that way?
Well, let me put it this way. It all depends on where you live, and again, all politics are local. And I think out here in the in the Midwest, especially and in Michigan, marijuana and medical marijuana is sort of a throwaway issue. They feel that a lot of them feel it's not really medicine; it's just some kind of hocus pocus, and need to reduce taxes. We need to do this, do that, and so on. And again, it's not something that's taken too deeply serious. I mean, to really actually get someone's attention. And we've been struggling this for a long time, and it finally did pay off, because we did find some legislators that are sympathetic, and basically it was introduced by my own state representative, whom I personally helped get elected to office.
So, Tim, with the huge value of traditional grassroots activism being proven out there, gathering signatures, being out there on the streets, there are also these other sort of traditional avenues, paved with money, as it were, that are very effective in getting the individual politicians to get behind marijuana issues.
Yeah, and it's very, very, very critical, and it gets very personal. Let's put it that way. And if a legislator knows you on a professional or friendship or political level, it means everything in the world, because there's so many people, so many interest groups and lobbyists that are tugging at their sleeve, and they don't know what the game is, and they tend to, or what these folks really want if they don't know them. But if they know you and trust you, you'll get a pass. That's really what it amounts to, and you can have a lot of power to some degree to change things. And this state representative, Lamar Lemons, his name is, and he did believe in the issue, so it's not exactly like it's some kind of payoff, but at the same time, he felt that, I'm trustworthy, I'm stable, I'm not going to embarrass him. We're not going to have a bunch of people, showing up in tie-dyed shirts and lighting up joints and, that kind of thing that's going to be dignified, that's going to be professionally handled, so he'll come out looking good.
And in talking about politicians taking this seriously, with so many Americans having some experience with marijuana in their lifetime, one would think that marijuana consumers would have serious political clout these days.
Yeah, that is true, and unfortunately, until I would say the passage of Proposal 215 in California, with medical marijuana and individuals, such as George Soros and Peter Lewis, and I mean very serious, very powerful players on the national scene getting involved and now and seriously financing these things, starting to get people's attention. Before that, I think it was more diffused. There was not a lot of money to work with, and again, to even advocate for something like this is scary. It's very scary to a lot of people, and we've had people that lose jobs. There was a gentleman, Bruce Kane, longtime activist. He was seen on CNN, giving an interview about hash bash. 6 months later, he was out the door, and he was in a kind of management position in a giant hospital system, and so he was kind of an at-will employee, but they pretty much drummed him out, and so it's very real. The danger is very real, and so I guess, like in my case, I mean, I own my own company, so I don't have to worry about getting fired. I don't have to worry, on my, and so I have a little bit more freedom. And we have other activists that are, they're not making the big dollars, and they have nothing to lose, and they're willing to, to step up to the plate. But a lot of common, regular, middle class people that are working for, W-2 wages and on and on. It's scary because it's like admitting that you're a criminal. It's real difficult. And I think but I think what we need to do, and the more it becomes legitimized by people that start out like people like Soros and so on, and lobbying efforts being set up in different states, it's getting better. I mean, it's been a sea change since I first got involved myself in 2001. I'm kind of new to this, but I've seen a big change, in terms of but it's still very difficult. Still very, very difficult. And most of our activists here in Michigan are individuals that are self-employed or cannot, or like retired or disabled or something like that, to the point where there is no risk, to their livelihood or their reputation, so to speak, if they care about that. And that's the problem, as I see.
So it really takes a lot of courage to work on marijuana issues in America right now, Tim.
But it doesn't take a lot. Let me point it out. It takes just a few courageous, intelligent, articulate people, and you can do a lot. I mean, what's that thing about Margaret Mead, said about, half a dozen people, to change the world? It doesn't take a lot of people. It doesn't, to really, to have some impact. And the more impact you have, the more other people start to come out of the closet and build up some courage and see, well, wait a minute, Tim didn't get arrested, nothing happened, so on and so forth. But that's what we got to do. It takes a few brave people to get the ball rolling, but it can get the ball rolling. I mean, we've got in Michigan, I would say, like over 300 dues-paying members. But the fact is we can count on maybe 20, all right, to actually do something. But and we've been having some good results here. It does. I want to emphasize it doesn't take a lot, but it does take commitment. It does take a certain, degree of courage and willingness to put it on the line.
We're with Tim Beck, the director of Michigan NORML, and we're discussing the upcoming legislative committee hearing for a medical marijuana bill in Michigan. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Tim Beck of Michigan NORML.
Whether on a train, plane, ferry, or automobile, these days I'm never far removed from listening to NORML's daily audio stash and weekly news on my computer or iPod. Where else in the world can folks listen to up-to-date information produced specifically for cannabis consumers? This is NORML's Executive Director, Alan St. Pierre, and NORML is growing the truth about cannabis, and the harvest is yours to reap. Tune in every day at 4:20 p.m. for your daily audio stash. Get hooked up with NORML's daily and weekly news podcast by visiting norml.org or normalaudiostash.com.
I'm your host, Chris Goldstein, and you're back with NORML's Daily Audio Stash today, and we're with Tim Beck, the director of Michigan NORML. We're discussing the upcoming legislative committee hearing for a medical marijuana bill in Michigan. Tim, we were just talking about the courage it takes to be a marijuana reform activist, but really, this issue is a great place for young people who are considering careers in nonprofit advocacy or nonprofit administration to get into right now.
Exactly, yeah. And the other thing, again, is actually, if you really want to be, if you can use the term safe, okay, it's usually safer to be advocating for, let's say, medical marijuana. Okay, because a large portion of the public already accepts medical marijuana, and while they're doing it to help people and sick people and blah, blah, as opposed to advocating for personal or so-called recreational use, if you get my drift. I mean, there is a little bit more of a safety margin there.
Also, Tim, you helped get an initiative regarding medical marijuana on the ballot in Flint, Michigan. That election will be coming up in February 2007. When these local medical marijuana initiatives are passed, do the patients get access right away?
Well, what it does, it basically prevents them from arrest if they're a legitimate patient by the local police. See, what we're doing in Flint, like a number of other cities back in the 1980s, passed anti-drug laws during the so-called crack epidemic. And what it was, because it was never illegal under Flint law to use marijuana or cocaine or heroin or whatever, it was always the enforcement mechanism was the state law. But as a way of gleaning fine money, especially for misdemeanor type stuff that would go into the city's coffers rather than go to the state. It was a scam, so they passed anti-marijuana laws. So what we're doing is amending the Flint City Code to allow for medical use of marijuana from the prohibition in the city code for marijuana in general. And the results that we've had in the cities is that there has never been anybody, arrested by the local police. It takes the local police out of the mix is what it amounts to. Now, of course, they can always charge you under state law, but no legitimate medical marijuana patient in any of those cities has ever had to endure arrest and harassment as a result of these changes that we've made.
So with such overwhelming support and seeing the effect of having 0 patients arrested by local police in places like Detroit and Ann Arbor, it seems like local law enforcement there have embraced these ordinances, at least after they're passed.
Once it's in place, and again, it's interesting because we've never, it all depends on basically the Detroit police had no comment. They didn't fight it. They didn't do anything when it was on. Now in Ferndale, the chief of police went nuts and was making threats, and they were going to arrest him anyway, and we're going to charge him under state law if this passes, and he got really, really ugly, and then finally, community pressure came down on him, and he just shut up. He didn't even talk to the media anymore, and then he finally kind of backtracked, and, that we have other priorities than sick people, and, on and on. Ann Arbor, the chief of police just went nuts again, making the same kinds of threats and on, along with the city attorney. And when the vote came in so overwhelmingly, I mean, they just basically shut up and conceded. And again, these are to hit 60% plus in an election, that's a thumping, as George Bush recently said. And they've been overwhelming, where if it was like close by 1 or 2%, yeah, that's maybe a different story. But the victories have been so overwhelming that there's virtually, for the police and the political establishment to ignore that kind of mandate, that's pretty tough politically to do.
So, Tim, once these are actually passed by voters, that reefer madness opposition seems to disappear.
That's exactly right. And what's been interesting about Flint, I don't think that necessarily the delay on the part of City Council was hostile. The city is in political turmoil. They're still fighting over an election last year, and the clerk and all these people are being probably really careful to kind of cover their rear ends, and that way their enemies can't say, well, my God, they just rushed this through, we didn't have time to comment, and on and on. And it's been interesting, there has been no opposition in any form whatsoever in the city of Flint. From anyone, and it always emerges at council meetings and things like that, or some crank will get up, at a hearing and start denouncing it. And I think what's really happened is that the political establishment, seeing the 4 victories that we've had, they've kind of given up. I'm hoping anyway. We'll see as we get closer to the election. But despite they really fought very, very, very hard. They fought Detroit very hard. The governor was involved. The state attorney general was involved in fighting it. ONDCP, the DEA. Various community puppet groups, and so forth. It was very, very nasty election, and that was. They threw everything at us but the kitchen sink, and we won by 60%. And then, Ann Arbor, it was the same thing. The governor and the attorney general got involved, and we know this from Freedom of Information Act documents that we got. It's all there. It's all on record. And again, when things hit the fan, they lost by 74%. And now they're just kind of going through the motions is how as I sense this.
Tim, it really sounds like it's a real political pitfall for elected officials to oppose medical marijuana any longer in Michigan.
Yeah, they've lost every time they've opposed it. That's what it amounts to. And what we're doing, we're creating legitimacy. We're creating, as I say, a sense of momentum and a sense of inevitability that I have to suspect is very, very discouraging for the hardcore drug warrior crowd to lose time and time again. And putting their reputations and political capital and whatever, on the line and continuing to lose, and so, which is, well, we're very pleased. Let's put it that way. And again, we got to keep in mind that this is part, like I say, it's a long-term strategy. But yeah, we've beaten them down, every time, and they realize unfortunately, that for them, that it's not too fruitful at this point to really fight this too hard.
Tim, this has been a great conversation today, and I really appreciate your joining us to talk about medical marijuana in Michigan.
It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to talking with you again down the road, Chris.
Tim Beck is the Executive Director of Michigan NORML. You can find out more at minorml.org. And you can support Michigan NORML by purchasing a copy of the book Burning Rainbow Farm from their website. We have links at normalaudiostash.com. This has been NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Thanks to Podshow.com for all the great pod-safe music. We feature the band Carne Cruda as our theme. Make sure you visit our website at normalaudiostash.com. That's NORMLAUDIOSTASH.com for more information about every day's show. Thanks to Red Aphid Interactive Media for the podcasting technology. We're back at 4:20 tomorrow. If you listen to the Audio Stash, cast your vote at Podcast Alley or other podcast directory services. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow. The podcasting technology of NORML is made possible by Red Aphid Interactive Media. More information at redaphid.com.